Hello, everyone. My name is Eric Carball. I teach in the Department of Middle Secondary and Math Education at James Madison University. And my colleague, Lori McCullough, who you'll meet later in the series of videos, and I have been working with Fairfax, helping them to better develop and implement their micro-credentialing program. And so this first video clip, even though you might have some background understanding of micro-credentials, this is just an opportunity to make sure we're all on the same page with what micro-credentials are and why we should implement them, or why they're a good embodiment of effective professional learning. So first and foremost, what does that effective professional learning look like? And I'm sure we all have some experience with professional learning, things that we've done, whether they're workshops or whether they're book clubs or whether it's going to conferences. There's some type of professional learning that we've engaged with. But the research says that effective professional learning really comes down to 4 different components. And so first and foremost, it's goal-oriented. So we're working towards some type of specific outcome, and that the professional learning is designed backward from that outcome, so that everything we're doing is building towards that goal, that skill that we're trying to develop, that understanding we're trying to reach. It's a process versus an event. And so what it is it's not just a one-stop shop where we go to something and we're done, but rather if we go to something like a conference or if we attend a workshop, there's some follow-up, right? There's a process to that where we are extending our learning, where we're trying things out. And it's not just we go to something and we're done. Job embedded and relevant, meaning that it happens within the context of an individual's classroom. It is relevant to their specific subject, to their specific grade level. And then also it's personalized. So the resources that are available for some folks, we might need a lot of resources that we have to read and prepare for to implement a micro-credential. For others who have a stronger understanding or math or particular skill, that implementation might take less background reading and viewing and watching, but rather we're just sort of implementing something we already do. And so as an example, if you are proficient in formative assessment, you use it all the time, a micro-credential on formative assessment for you might just be demonstrating that competency versus actually learning a lot and then doing it. And so for some completers of micro-credentials, they're further down that learning trajectory. And so they're ready to implement something without a lot of background learning. And so there are entry points for different people based on where you are on your particular professional learning trajectory. And so if you think about the professional learning experiences that you've had, you might find some that adhere to some of these principles, that some of them that don't adhere to some of these principles. But really thinking about your previous experiences, you can probably categorize whether they meet these particular elements of effective professional learning. So what are micro-credentials? Much like we value performance-based assessments with our students because they are opportunity for relevant and meaningful work, for application of learning versus just memorization and practicing skills. Same deal for our educators, right? These are performance-based assessments that help educators demonstrate mastery of a particular competency or skill. They're an alternate form of professional learning, so just like we talked about with effective professional learning on the previous slide. They are job embedded, they are sustained, relevant, it's meaningful work, and most importantly, they're focused on student outcomes. And so what we're looking at is whatever skill is being implemented, what is the impact on students? That might be social emotional impact, that might be academic impact, but we're looking for some type of impact on student learning. And the idea, again, is it's job embedded. So it happens within the context of an individual's professional work. They collect that evidence within the context of that work, and they document what impact that has on student learning. And so what are the components of micro-credentials? We know why they're important. They reflect these elements of effective professional learning. They are performance-based assessment. But what is included in a micro-credential? We have 5 primary components for this. So first and foremost, there's a course description. And this basically lays out what the micro-credential is and why this is something worth pursuing. And within that course description, there might be some evidence of research base and why this is something worth pursuing. Then there's the competency. So we mentioned before, this is goal-oriented. That's something you're going to see throughout as we talk about micro-credentials, getting into like feedback later in these assessor trainings, is that there's a specific goal that we're working towards. There's a competency, a skill, we are trying to develop that. And that's clearly identified from the start. Learning resources, I mentioned earlier, depending on where you are on a professional learning trajectory, you might have many resources you need to access. You might have a few resources you need to access, but those resources are provided within the micro-credential. And some of those, many of those might be optional. And much of the micro-credentials we've been developing, there's the optional resources. For some micro-credentials, there might be a resource or two that are required reading or required viewing prior to getting into the micro-credential. But those resources are available for the individual to access and to process and to use to prepare for number 4, which is the assignment. And so the assignment is broken down into 3 primary components. There's a pre-task questions or pre-reflection questions where you're reflecting prior to the implementation of a particular task. And so those reflection questions help provide the assessor, which is in particular, particularly important for your work. Those provide the assessor with some context. Where do you teach? What grade do you teach? What are your students like? What subject is this? Things like that. And so that provides some context. And it also gives the assessor some understanding about the background, familiarity and experience with the particular competency or skill that these individuals are working towards or demonstrating for the micro-credential. And so it provides a lot of context and reflection. It really just sets the stage for the next part, which is the task or the artifact. And so that is the lesson plan, that's the assessment, that's the survey, that's whatever strategy is being implemented within the classroom. And then the reflection part is sort of that impact. So how did it go? What worked? What didn't? How do you know? And we can also tie back to those pre-reflection questions. One of the things that I love is like, what challenge do you anticipate before you complete this? And then coming back to that and saying, well, were the challenges what you expected? Did something else happen, et cetera? And then last, and this is again another important component for assessors, is the rubric. So the pre-reflection questions or the pre-task questions have a rubric. The actual task has a rubric, and then the post-reflection questions have a rubric as well. And so for each of those components, we have some type of tool that we can use to provide more reliable and valid assessing when we're trying to evaluate the work that's being submitted. So this is what and why micro-credentials. I'll be back later when we talk a little bit about feedback, but I hope you enjoy the rest of this training in the meantime. Thank you.